When The Wild Bunch exploded onto movie screens in 1969, it didn't just break the rules, it rewrote them. The film was brutal, poetic, and revolutionary. Director Sam Peckinpah didn't just stage a Western, he orchestrated a blood-soaked ballet of masculinity, aging, and the bitter twilight of outlaw honor. But what truly made The Wild Bunch unforgettable wasn't just the gunfights or the slow-motion carnage. It was the weary eyes, the clenched jaws, and the haunted souls of its cast. These weren't just actors. They were weathered men who had lived through the golden era of Hollywood, and they brought every scar and triumph with them to the screen. Today, over half a century later, The Wild Bunch feels like a ghost story. The dusty trails of the American West have long been silent, and so too are the voices of the men who once rode them. William Holden, the reluctant leader Pike Bishop, stood tall with his weary charisma, his own off-screen demons bleeding into every line. Ernest Borgnine, playing the loyal Dutch, had a grin like a canyon and a laugh that could shake the saloon walls, but his real life held layers few ever saw. Robert Ryan, always the man chasing shadows, gave his Deke Thornton a sorrowful edge only someone truly disillusioned could summon. And then there were the supporting giants. Edmond O'Brien, nearly blind and ravaged by age even then, delivered one last burst of chaotic fire as Freddie Sykes. Warren Oates, wild-eyed and uncontainable as Lyle Gorge, seemed to be burning from the inside out, a man destined to never play it safe. And Ben Johnson, stoic and grounded as Hector Gorge, was the real cowboy in a sea of actors, a rodeo legend whose silence spoke louder than any monologue. These men didn't just act in The Wild Bunch. They were The Wild Bunch. Their lives, filled with triumphs, tragedies, addictions, political stances, and personal battles, mirrored the film's central themes of loyalty, obsolescence, and violence as a form of final expression. In many ways, The Wild Bunch became their cinematic last stand, a swan song for a dying breed of actor and man. In this video, we look back at 6 of these unforgettable figures. Each one brought a part of himself to the screen, and each one left something behind. From Academy Award winners to hard-drinking rebels, from box office legends to cult heroes, their stories are as raw and gripping as any Western shootout. Now, the saloon doors have closed. The dust has settled. And all that remains are the echoes of their guns, and the stories worth telling again. William Holden, the reluctant outlaw haunted by stardom and self-destruction. When William Holden stepped into the boots of Pike Bishop, he wasn't just playing a man past his prime, he was that man. The actor who once defined post-war Hollywood masculinity in Sunset Boulevard and Stalag 17 had grown older, rougher around the edges, and deeply conflicted. In The Wild Bunch, his portrayal of a weary gang leader chasing one last score wasn't a stretch, it was a reflection. By 1969, Holden was a fading star struggling with alcoholism, tormented by the distance between his image and his inner turmoil. Peckinpah knew it. That's why he cast him. Pike Bishop's every grimace, every sigh, every glance over his shoulder carried the weight of real-life regrets. It was a performance carved from truth. Holden's eyes told the story of a man who had seen too much, lost too much, and couldn't stop chasing redemption he'd never find. Off-screen, Holden's life mirrored the tragic arc of his characters. Despite his Oscar win and box office success, he battled heavy drinking, a string of failed relationships, and deep loneliness. Friends described him as brilliant but closed off, charming yet deeply melancholic. His affair with Audrey Hepburn was the stuff of tabloid legend, yet it ended with heartbreak and lifelong regret. In later years, he became a recluse, avoiding the Hollywood limelight that had once crowned him king. He died alone in 1981, slipping on a rug in his apartment, striking his head, and bleeding out. No one found him for days. Holden's legacy is forever bound to The Wild Bunch, a man out of time, clinging to a code the world had forgotten. In a film about dying legends, his performance stood as a final roar before silence. Ernest Borgnine, the grinning veteran whose heartbeat anchored The Wild Bunch. Ernest Borgnine didn't just play Dutch Engstrom, he lived him. Loyal, loud, and full of heart, Dutch was the kind of man who would follow his leader to hell and back, and Borgnine brought that loyalty to the screen with raw, infectious energy. In a cast full of tormented loners and haunted men, he was the muscle that still believed in brotherhood, even when the world turned to dust. His signature gap-toothed grin, his barrel-chested laugh, they made Dutch more than a gunslinger. They made him human. Born in 1917, Borgnine had already carved out an impressive career before The Wild Bunch. He won an Academy Award for Marty in 1955, playing the lonely Bronx butcher, proof that beneath the gruff exterior was a deep well of sensitivity. But Hollywood rarely gave him tender roles. With his bulldog face and stocky frame, he was cast as villains, tough guys, or comic relief. It made his role in The Wild Bunch all the more poignant. A tough man with a code, charging into a hopeless finale not out of bloodlust, but out of loyalty. Off-screen, Borgnine was a paradox. He was married 5 times, one of them infamously to Ethel Merman, a union that lasted barely a month, and often laughed off his romantic failures with gusto. He served in the Navy for over a decade before becoming an actor, and that military discipline never left him. Co-stars often described him as kind, professional, and deeply supportive. Even in old age, he was a vibrant presence, working well into his 90s with the same twinkle in his eye. Borgnine passed away in 2012 at the age of 95, a rarity among his castmates who left far too soon. His long life and prolific career, spanning over 60 years, cemented him as one of Hollywood's most beloved character actors. But for many, his role in The Wild Bunch remains his most resonant. In a film about men running out of time, Borgnine gave us a reminder that loyalty and laughter can echo long after the final shootout. Robert Ryan, the quiet storm torn between justice and damnation. Robert Ryan's portrayal of Deke Thornton in The Wild Bunch was a masterclass in restrained agony. As the former gang member turned reluctant bounty hunter, Ryan's Deke is a man torn between loyalty and survival, forever haunted by the choices that put him on the opposite side of the gun. His every line drips with sorrow, every pause weighted by invisible shackles. In a film brimming with explosive violence, Ryan was the smoldering fuse, controlled, tormented, and inching toward combustion. Born in 1909, Ryan came from an upper-class Chicago family, educated at Dartmouth, and served as a Marine drill instructor during World War II. But there was always a dissonance between his real-life ideals and the roles he was asked to play. A deeply principled liberal who campaigned for civil rights and disarmament, Ryan was often cast as bigots, violent men, or morally bankrupt figures. He excelled in these roles. Crossfire, the naked spur, the setup, but they nod at him. He once said, "I've been a heavy all my life, but I have never hurt anyone." By the time he joined The Wild Bunch, Ryan was terminally ill. Unknown to most of the cast and crew, he had been diagnosed with lymphatic cancer. He was dying, and he knew it. That knowledge lends an eerie power to his performance. His Deke doesn't just look tired, he looks finished. The way he watches Pike's descent, the way he speaks of honor like it's a ghost, it wasn't just acting. It was farewell. In real life, Ryan was a private, gentle man, devoted to his family and to causes most actors shied away from. He used his fame not for vanity, but for activism. He died in 1973, just weeks after completing his final film. Ryan never won an Oscar, though many believed he deserved one several times over. But in The Wild Bunch, he left behind something greater than gold statues, the soul of a man who tried to do right in a world gone wrong. His Deke Thornton is not just a character, he's a question mark with a badge, asking whether redemption is still possible when the dust finally settles. Edmond O'Brien, the blinded firebrand whose final roar lit up the screen. Edmond O'Brien's role as Freddie Sykes in The Wild Bunch wasn't meant to be pretty, and neither was the man who played him. With a scraggly beard, bloodshot eyes, and a voice like cracked gravel, Sykes was the misfit outlaw of the bunch, the aging troublemaker too stubborn to die quietly. And O'Brien, then nearing the end of his career and battling serious health issues, leaned into the role with furious abandon. His performance was chaotic, brash, and strangely touching, like a dying fire refusing to go out. O'Brien had been a respected figure in Hollywood since the 1940s. Born in 1915 in New York, he trained in Shakespeare and starred in noir classics like DOA and The Killers. He was the kind of actor who could switch from desperate victim to power-hungry villain with ease. In 1955, he won an Academy Award for The Barefoot Contessa, but never became a leading man in the conventional sense. His round face, burly frame, and intense energy made him perfect for character roles, especially those that lived on the edge. By the time The Wild Bunch came around, O'Brien was already in physical decline. He was suffering from the early effects of Alzheimer's disease, and his vision was rapidly deteriorating. Some reports suggest he was nearly blind during filming, and had difficulty remembering lines. But somehow, none of that dulled his performance. In fact, it may have added to the wild unpredictability of Freddie Sykes, the outlaw who couldn't be tamed, even by time. Off-screen, O'Brien was known as a deeply intelligent man with a passion for theater and politics. He supported democratic causes, spoke out for civil liberties, and avoided Hollywood scandal. But his final years were difficult. Alzheimer's claimed him slowly and painfully. He spent his last days in a care facility, passing away in 1985 at the age of 69. His last scene in The Wild Bunch, grinning madly as he picks up a new gang of young outlaws, felt like a wink to his own legacy. Even as the old world burned around him, O'Brien's Freddie Sykes remained unbroken, reminding us all that even the most ragged men can go out laughing, and loud. Warren Oates, the wild-eyed rebel who burned bright and faded too soon. Warren Oates didn't act Lyle Gorch, he embodied him. With his twitchy eyes, crooked grin, and unpredictable energy, Oates brought to The Wild Bunch a wildness that couldn't be faked. Lyle wasn't the smartest or the most disciplined of the gang, but he was all instinct, reckless, impulsive, alive in a way that felt dangerous. Oates turned what could have been a side character into a raw nerve of tension and charm, the kind of man who laughs louder the closer he gets to death. Born in Kentucky in 1928, Oates had no Hollywood polish. He was blue-collar through and through, and he never tried to hide it. After serving in the U.S. Marine Corps, he fell into acting almost by accident, eventually becoming a favorite of directors like Monty Hellman and Sam Peckinpah. His face, weathered, expressive, and strangely handsome, wasn't built for glossy stardom, but for the rough edges of realism. That's why he thrived in the new Hollywood era, where anti-heroes and misfits were finally given the spotlight. In real life, Oates was as unpredictable as the characters he played. He could be magnetic one minute and withdrawn the next. He drank heavily, smoked constantly, and often pushed his body past its limits. But he also had a deep soul, a love for poetry and painting, and an uncanny ability to find the humanity in broken characters. Friends and co-stars described him as fiercely loyal but hard to know, a man of contradictions who lived without a filter. His collaboration with Peckinpah on The Wild Bunch marked the beginning of a fruitful but turbulent partnership. Oates went on to star in Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, another violent meditation on death and dignity. But it was The Wild Bunch that introduced him to the world as a powder keg of cinematic intensity. Oates died of a heart attack in 1982, at just 53 years old. His death shocked those who knew him. It was too early, too sudden, and too cruel. Yet, in a way, it felt fitting for a man who lived fast, felt deeply, and left it all on the screen. His legacy isn't one of polish or prestige, it's one of fire. Ben Johnson, the cowboy who rode from rodeos to Oscars, leaving dust and dignity behind. In The Wild Bunch, Ben Johnson played Hector Gorch, the quieter half of the Gorch brothers, less volatile than Warren Oates' Lyle but no less dangerous. With his tall frame, steely gaze, and calm presence, Johnson didn't need to shout to make an impact. He was the kind of man who said more with a nod than others did with a speech. On screen, he felt real because he was real, a genuine cowboy who brought the Old West with him wherever he went. Born in Oklahoma in 1918, Johnson was raised in the saddle. His father was a champion rodeo rider, and Ben followed the same path, winning world titles in roping before Hollywood ever called. He stumbled into the movie business when he was hired to wrangle horses for Howard Hughes and eventually became a stuntman and stand-in for John Ford's westerns. It wasn't long before his quiet charisma earned him speaking roles. And from there, a career that spanned over 5 decades. By the time he joined the Wild Bunch, Johnson had already become a trusted face in the genre. He wasn't an actor pretending to be a cowboy. He was a cowboy who just happened to act. That authenticity oozed from every scene he was in. Hector Gorch may not have been the loudest or the most complex character in the film, but Johnson gave him weight, a sense of decency beneath the grit, and a brotherly connection that grounded the gang's chaos. Outside of his film work, Johnson remained humble and close to his roots. He avoided Hollywood's party scene, preferred his ranch to red carpets, and was known for his generosity. When he won the Academy Award for The Last Picture Show in 1971, he almost turned down the role because it had too much profanity. "My mother wouldn't like it," he famously said. That was Ben Johnson, fiercely loyal, principled, and never chasing fame. He passed away in 1996 at the age of 77 from a heart attack. His funeral was modest, attended by fellow cowboys, actors, and friends who remembered a man who never let Hollywood change him. In the Wild Bunch, Johnson was the quiet backbone, the moral compass in a world crumbling into dust. And in life, he remained that same steady hand, riding through cinema with dignity few could match. The Wild Bunch wasn't just a movie. It was a last ride, not just for the outlaws on screen, but for the men who portrayed them. These weren't plastic cowboys with polished boots and clean morals. They were flesh and blood, each carrying their own battles, regrets, and fading hopes into the roles that would become some of the most defining of their careers. William Holden, the weathered leader haunted by his own decline, gave a performance as Pike Bishop that mirrored the man he had become, flawed, aging, but fighting to the end. Ernest Borgnine brought the fire of a born fighter, his booming laughter masking a complex soul shaped by war, love, and heartbreak. Robert Ryan, the reluctant hunter with tired eyes, channeled a man caught between ideals and obligation, even as cancer quietly claimed him behind the scenes. Edmond O'Brien, almost blind and fading fast, delivered a final performance that was both ferocious and heartbreaking. A fitting send-off for a man who had always burned a little too hot. Warren Oates, the live wire with a poet's heart, reminded us that chaos could be beautiful, even tragic. And Ben Johnson, the cowboy who never needed to pretend, stood tall in silence, the last of a dying breed. Their deaths came in waves, some quietly in hospital beds, others suddenly and alone. Some lived long enough to witness the changing tides of Hollywood, others left far too soon. But all of them, in their final roles in the Wild Bunch, seemed to sense the end, not just of their characters, but of an era. The Western was dying, the old myths were unraveling, and the world had little room left for men who lived by dusty codes of loyalty and honor. And yet, even as the final shots rang out and the screen faded to black, something remained. A legacy. A silhouette against the crimson sky. A reminder that stories about men like these, raw, real, scarred, and brave, still matter. Because while the Wild Bunch may be gone, their dust still rises with every replay, every whispered quote, every fan who dares to say, "Let's ride."